So as we talk about these scheduling issues, one of the things you've heard me mention a number of times is the idea of sort of coordination and like what are the systems for having these conversations. A couple of key things that must happen. The project manager has to be reviewing the current billing, so it has to be going through how many hours have been spent, the idea of a timesheet, they're collecting the timesheets, they know how many hours by each of the different logical players involved, and they're reviewing that and keeping on top of that information. If you're not doing that, there's no way to know whether you're on track or not in terms of how much fee has been spent through the project. The other thing is there was idea of regular meetings. Now, I'm a believer in meetings. I like having meetings. I think it makes sense. It's one of those spots where information comes through. If it's all done through memo or something, it has a certain kind of flavor to it. There's something about an in-person meeting that allows sort of side types of information that you wouldn't necessarily get from just an email or a text or a memo or something. So I'm personally a fan of the idea of having regular meetings. But I will also say that NCARB is very specifically a fan of having regular meetings, that they often will kind of assume that the logical answer is going to be something like, what's the best way to keep good coordination? Well, the answer is almost always going to be you should have monthly meetings, or you should have bi-weekly meetings, or you should have weekly meetings, or whatever is appropriate to the scale of the project. And that is one of those opportunities to have those discussions that gets not just the straightforward questions answered, but also all those moments where somebody's sitting at the table and they hear somebody else talking about something and they say, oh yeah, we got the crane coming in for the HVAC equipment, and you're like, oh, wait, was a crane coming in? We need a crane for the piece of equipment for this other thing, for we need the steel needs to be able to get craned in or something like that. And so there's those moments of information that can transpire at that spot that can make everything more efficient. Now, endless meetings can be boring and inefficient, of course, but the gist of the expectation is always going to be regularize and have meetings, be in front of each other, and have it be a regular, formal system. So it's an informal discussion, but it's a formal system of that informal discussion. And at those regular meetings, both in-house with the staff, but also with all of your consultants and also with your clients at regular intervals, not necessarily the same meetings, but sometimes. And that all of those, that idea of those regular meetings is a way to sort of everybody knows what's going on. So if there's important information to be had, that information should bubble up at those meetings. The other thing that, as we talk about these schedule elements, one of the key elements is the idea of realistic deadlines. I already mentioned the idea about leaving time in the schedule for the client to review or for code officials to review, whatever it happens to be, maybe bankers to review. There's a lot of different people potentially in a project who may have to have a say about whether something moves on. And if you're saying, well, it's going to take us 40 days to do this work, and you give the schedule to the client, you say, all right, here's our schedule, and it's 40 days, that means there's no leeway in there for anybody to have a moment where they go through and think about it and show their spouse, what do you think, or talk to a banker or whatever it happens to be. You've made it so tight that it's not really believable, and that can only come back to hurt you. So the idea that you're being realistic about these elements is hugely important. And then the idea that you have thorough communication. So the thorough communication, when I say that, what I'm talking about is there's a sort of funny line that has to be walked. You're looking to be redundant in the sense that there is nothing that can slide through and not be considered that it's been communicated clearly, but not so redundant that you could have misinformation. That's one of the interesting things about this kind of work is that we always try very hard not to have the same information in two locations when we're talking about a set of design drawings or contract documents. But when it comes to keeping track of design decisions and information from these various meetings and various things that are going on, it is important to keep like the base notes for you when you were walking through you're scratching your notes through the site visit, or the notes that you had for the design meeting around the conference table, that you've got some way of keeping those notes. Maybe you scan them and keep them in a set file or something. But then there's also an official version of that information that gets maybe bullet pointed, or becomes this decision was made on Friday, and here's 2 reasons why, and this is the implication from it. So there's some distillation of that information that becomes something that can be sent around to everybody. So what I'm saying here is that there's these regular meetings, there's this whole process, but that you also are then using that information to keep solid track of it, and having it at multiple levels of information. So I have the base information, but then I have the information that's distilled down and given out to everybody, so everybody has a clear access to all the decisions that have been made.